Good evening. I am the Maven of the Eventide, and welcome to Vampire Reviews. The Kiss of the Damned. Now, pro tip, my friends, when a vampire says kiss, they mean bite. Yeah. Kiss is just the sexy word they use for full-on fang penetration. Always. Every time. Just trust me. That is why the kiss is damned in this tiny indie film from 2012. Written and directed by Xan Cassavetes. Although Kiss of the Damned is technically her first feature film, Xan Cassavetes is no baby filmmaker. She is the daughter of a famous Hollywood family and has been in the business all her life. She was challenged to come up with a horror movie idea, so of course she chose to focus on vampires. 2012 was the year of the vampire film, after all. We got more vampire movies that year than any other year in history. Yes, we have the Twilight franchise to thank for that. See, I can be nice. Some of the films from that time were just trying to cash in on the popularity trend, of course, but there were others made with genuine love. I mean, for any artists who ever wanted to make a vampire film, this was their chance to seize the zeitgeist. If you've never heard of this movie, that's because it didn't make it far out of the indie circuits. It showed at South by Southwest in 2013 and in a tiny handful of art house theaters and was on Netflix for a while. It's actually on Hulu right now if you want to find it. Kiss of the Damned definitely falls into the passion project category. Thanks to her industry privilege and family connections, Xan Cassavetes was able to make exactly the movie she wanted, without having to answer to a studio or investors or anything. She went into debt to make it, but relished in the artistic freedom to do vampires her way. Inspired by the European vampire films she grew up with in the 1970s that were distinctly sexier and more traditionally Gothic, that's a Gothic with a capital G, than their American or British counterparts. And if Gothic, sexy vampires are your cup of blood, is this the film for you? It turned out being much more of an erotic thriller than a traditional horror movie. It's moody and atmospheric, focused on feelings over action. The vampires are all about romance and philosophy and ethics, and spend a lot of time in existential reflection. The horror here doesn't come from scares, but from the grotesque juxtaposition of beauty and death, sophistication and chaos. From the subversion of expectations of having a delicate-seeming woman wield brutal, terrible power and relish in it. Cassavetes chose her actors for their gorgeousness over their acting skills because the images, the feeling of it all was what was important to her. The plot is incidental. Not that there's no plot. Like all true Gothic stories, this one is about a house. In the Gothic, the house emerges as much of a character as the people who inhabit it. Usually a sinister or foreboding character, of course. The film was shot on location at this real mansion outside of New York City. It's big, lonely, unlived in, above a lake, in a sinister environment. When Xan Cassavetes toured it one day, it made her think of vampires, and she came up with the entire idea for her movie. The cast and crew even lived in it all during filming to become one with it. In the movie, this house belongs to a fancy, glamorous elder vampire, Xenia, who is the leader of the greater New York metro vampire community. And though she lives in the city, where she is a chic stage actor, she lets other vampires stay at her country house when they need a place to crash. Currently living a romantically lonely, secluded Gothic life there is the vampire Juna. Like Xenia, she's an enlightened vampire who's not so boorish as to feed on human blood. No, she lives off the animals in the surrounding forest. One night, she meets Paolo, a sexy Hollywood screenwriter who is angsting over the fact that he now writes commercial blockbuster movies instead of the artsy hipster scripts he used to. It's love at first sight for the both of them for reasons. Maybe it's a vampire attraction thing? But Juna's lust is intrinsically connected to her bloodlust, and she can't get physical with Paolo without wanting to bite him. She cannot kiss without damning him to either die or become a wretched creature of the night like her. So wretched. Vampire life just looks so miserable, doesn't it? She tries to reject him, but they simply cannot resist each other. She tells him she's a vampire, but he doesn't believe her, of course, so she chains herself up and shows him. But Paolo's not afraid. Nope, he is totally into it, and lets her bite him, becomes a vampire, gives up his entire life without a second thought, and moves into the awesome house with Juna. So they live an artistically gothic and glamorous unlife together, feeding off deer and possums, until one night, Juna's evil vampire sister shows up to stay at the house for a week on her way to vampire rehab and ruins everything. If this sounds familiar, yes, it is the exact same plot as Only Lovers Left Alive. Jim Jarmusch's fantastic art film, which came out a year after this one. We discussed that one 4.5 years ago. I've been talking to you about vampires for a long time. The plot similarities are probably coincidence, though. Even though it came out after, Only Lovers Left Alive had been in production for years before Kiss of the Damned. Sexy, evil punk rock vampire sisters ruining brooding romantic vampires' peaceful existence is just de rigueur for the Gothic, I guess. And unlike Only Lovers Left Alive, where angsty vampire Tom Hiddleston is really the central figure, the rest of Kiss of the Damned centers on the tension between the sisters and Xenia, making it a thoroughly female-focused film, with Paolo merely in a supporting role. Evil sister Mimi ravenously kills humans, which is why she's getting sent to vampire rehab by the other vampires who only live off animals. Like Juna, she conflates blood with sex and the kiss with the bite, but in a violent, destructive way that endangers the secrecy of the vampire community. In this way, the vampire serves as more than just a metaphor for addiction, but also as an allegory for the Madonna whore complex, which, if you're unfamiliar, is a Freudian psychoanalytic concept that boils down to men seeing women as either saintly virgins or debased prostitutes, with no possibilities in between. You'd like to think that such a repressive, Victorian-ish concept would be something that is no longer an issue in modern society, but Hollywood still uses a dichotomy as a shortcut in screen language all the time. This film explores the internalized misogyny that can lead women to still struggle with it, even women who are powerful, immortal creatures of the night. Although Mimi is on the horror side, she is no liberated thinker who would challenge the complex. She is mentally trapped in the dichotomy, and she calls the virginal Juna a hypocrite for turning Paolo when Juna is otherwise so sanctimonious about never enjoying humans.
You've judged me so harshly.
For these vampires, human blood is treated as an addictive substance. They discuss the difficulty in managing their craving and how long they've been able to practice complete and total abstinence, which is their only idea of a solution. Mimi indulges in her human blood addiction, and for this, she's being shipped off to rehab, like a fallen woman in the Victorian era being sent to a convent or asylum. Mimi gets worse and worse in her recklessness, like a troubled child acting out for attention, who's been told so many times she's a bad person that she might as well just prove how bad she can be and live up to the image. She also relishes in bringing the other vampires down to her level. She uses her powers to seduce Paolo to infidelity, her influence drives Juna to kill Paolo's agent in a fit of bloodlust, and she tempts Xenia to break her abstinence with a delicious virgin and then uses Xenia's fall off the wagon as blackmail. But the thing about the Madonna horror complex is that it isn't based in reality. It's a complex. No woman is ever truly one thing or the other. All of us exist in multi-dimensional layers in between. The complex forces a pretense. And in this case, if Mimi keeps Xenia's secret and Juna never admits to killing the agent, then they can maintain their virginal reputations among a snooty, elitist vampire community. But at what cost? Inside, they're ravaged by it. And like for many women in the real world, there is no solution or escape. Xan Cassavetes describes this film as something based on atmosphere, and some of the things that troubled her about being alive. Specifically, about being a woman. A woman is, she says, maybe a little bit intimidated by her own sexuality, as well as her own fear of hurting someone, and what physical contact means with someone, and what attraction means. The horror in this movie is not just about fear of being a vampire, but about fear of being a woman, and the complex social paths women must navigate to be accepted, loved, or deemed even worthy of existence. Sexuality is a form of power, just like vampiric superstrength, but it's also an opportunity for vulnerability, similar to vampiric weaknesses. There is a lot of sex in this movie, but unlike with many sexy female vampires in cinematic history, all the sex scenes here are narrative. Much more is at stake in each of the scenes than the sex itself. Though she deliberately chose gorgeous French models to play her lady vampires, the director doesn't let the camera frame them as objects for voyeuristic pleasure with any sense of gratuitousness. Instead, they are active agents with complex motivations, driving pivotal moments of dramatic tension. An interviewer for Starburst magazine asked Cassavetes, "As a writer, as a director, what are your ambitions?" She said, "I find that being a woman of a certain age, that through my life, what works best for me, what appeals to me most, is not really knowing or having a set idea of who I am, who my people are, where I feel comfortable, what I can count on. I like to just be a slave to what excites me. And sometimes those things are so out of the blue and random that it makes it exciting to me. So I would just like to stay light on my feet and just not be a phony. Just be open to anything that's worth doing and exciting me to the point that I want to share it with other people. And not be shamed for it." This film isn't perfect, but it's indulgent and shameless. And honestly, so enjoyable in how it embraces its classy, dreamy, sensual aesthetic. A story from the vampire's perspective about inter-vampire turmoil, not another us versus them framed against humans. It is a love letter to a certain style of classically elegant romantic vampires that don't get seen much anymore because so many people have ideas of what vampires are supposed to be. But there is no supposed to be. Not for vampires, because they're not real. Not for women. Not for people in general. There is no wrong way to be. When asked by Out magazine why she chose to do a genre film for her first movie instead of something focused on reality, Cassavetes said, "In any genre film, there's so much room for existential reflection. Her vampires are confused and fighting their way through it and finding out their identity and how to be in the world. The vampire genre leaves room for that. You are able to have a protagonist leaving one chapter of their life and moving on to another. We see this in Paolo as the representation of the new vampire."
Are you new?
So they tell me that you're new?
Yes.
He's dissatisfied with his screenwriter life and its artistic restrictions, and the vampire offers him the opportunity to embrace a new chapter of existence. Unlike characters in other vampire stories we've seen, he's not self-destructive in his attraction to the darkness of the vampire. He is transformative and open to the vulnerability that comes with that. Considering the addiction metaphor angle, this is a film about self-control and containment, and it shows that neither of those things are necessarily healthy or even truly possible. Mimi's way of life is obviously destructive, but so is Juna's in an emotional sense. It is only after she admits to Paolo that she killed his agent, opens up about the fact that she's not as flawless and virginal as she's been desperate to be, and receives his forgiveness, while also granting him forgiveness for having shower sex with Mimi, that they are able to accept their true complex natures and find peace in their romance. Juna realizes that she's not as different from Mimi as she thought, and now she understands herself better. She can accept that she can still be true to her ethics even if she messes up. After all, there is no end to addiction. It is a lifelong struggle, an eternal one for a vampire, and accepting that is a step on the path to healthy management. Mimi, meanwhile, is riding high after blackmailing Xenia when she kind of completely randomly gets in a car accident that leads to her demise. And I am not a fan of this ending. If Mimi's going to be punished for her evil ways, I would have liked it to have been as a result of her flaws and conflict with the other characters. But this feels like the movie was running out of time and didn't know how to end, so bam! Car accident. Thank goodness she dies, because it would have really sucked for everyone if she didn't, but whew, that was convenient. Now there are no consequences to her evil and everyone can go right back to normal. Is this supposed to be like an act of God? A puritanical smiting for her whoreness? An act of nature? She swerves to avoid hitting a sudden deer, and the deer represents the alternative lifestyle to her preferred slaughter of humans, but it's still a passive coincidence. The house's beleaguered maid finds her, and Mimi begs for help as she roasts in the sunrise. But the housekeeper is pleased to see her go after the harm she's caused. And as the housekeeper serves as an extension of the house, it's like the house itself is having the final say in Mimi's dark fate. Seriously, in Gothic stories, never piss off the house. I am the Maven of the Eventide, and who wants a kiss now? Vampire art films, even if they're not great, there's always something to talk about because the artistes always have so many artistic intentions. What are your favorite vampire art films? Anything I haven't talked about yet? Anything I should check out? Let me know. Also, subscribe, like, etc., ring the alert bell. Watch these videos that I'm putting here because they don't have enough clicks and they need more love. Good night and kisses.